who's the Senior Advocate at the Foreign Prisoner Support Service. Martin Hodgson, thank you so much for your time. Anzac Sullivan's death is the fourth Aboriginal death in custody in 3 weeks. There are these calls for an independent investigation. What more can you tell us about the circumstances of his death?
Well, we don't know a great deal about the circumstances of his death. It's taken quite a while for it to come to light. And in the meantime, that's meant that every Aboriginal member of the community in New South Wales has been wondering if it's their loved one who's died, whether it's their loved one in custody, their loved one being pursued by police. But with 4 deaths in custody in 2 weeks, it's just a horrific time.
And is that part of the issue here, is the lag in time from when the death occurs and when it's made public? Because there were 2 other deaths as part of this 4 that were only revealed under questioning during a New South Wales parliamentary hearing.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very difficult for families to get transparency if there is this, system of silence in place where nobody finds anything out. It's also near impossible for support services to assist families. And unfortunately, it gives police and corrective services a good deal of time to cover up what's really gone on. And we know this to be true from the finding of endless inquests into deaths in custody, that the statements provided by police at the time are simply not accurate. And so any delay is unacceptable.
How much does a death like this affect the local community?
Well, I think it's devastating to the young man's family, his community, and to all Aboriginal people who now, with 4 in 2 weeks, are wondering what's next, who's next. We've just heard about a young boy with an intellectual disability in South Australia targeted by the police, alleging he was riding a stolen bike. It was his bike. It was given to him by a charity. Now, not only did they take that off him and his helmet, they posted it on Facebook like he was a murderer on the run. He'd done nothing wrong. So if police will treat a young boy with an intellectual disability like that, how do we think they treat someone with an outstanding warrant? And then it's no shock that that person ends up dead. We need answers.
In the case of that young boy, do you think that was racial profiling?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. If it was anybody else, they wouldn't be touched. I mean, what is a 13-year-old riding down the street on his push bike, had his helmet on? He's not doing anything wrong. These kids should be left alone. It's only because he was Aboriginal he was confronted by police, and then with his intellectual disability, he was further discriminated against. And my heart goes out to that young boy and to all the parents of young Aboriginal kids this is their fear every single day. Their kid can't even ride their push bike down the street without being treated like a common criminal.
Yeah, it's a devastating story, and you can read more of it on the ABC News website. I wanted to ask you about the New South Wales parliamentary investigation into Aboriginal incarceration. It's due to deliver its report next month. What change do you think that report could deliver?
Well, I think the report will deliver no change. It'll be exactly like every other report we've read since the Royal Commission 30 years ago. The reality is we don't need more paperwork done. We know what happens and we know why it happens. We have more than 450 Aboriginal people have died in custody in the last 30 years. Now, many of them are just like this young boy. Take Rebecca Maher in Newcastle, put in a cell having never committed a crime. She was racially targeted. The police treated her like an animal and jumped around like they were chimpanzees while she died in the cell. She had committed no crime. So I don't think there should be any further burden placed on the Aboriginal community. I'm not interested in little bits around the edges. The police must be told by their minister and by all premiers and the Prime Minister to keep their hands off Aboriginal people unless they have due cause. Otherwise, these deaths will continue.
There is a campaign to lift the age of criminality from 10 to 14. What difference will that make?
Well, none. I mean, we've seen what happened in Dondar. There were children over 14 there who were abused in custody, who were sexually assaulted in custody, who were tortured. So we'd be taking a 13-year-old out of that system but saying it's okay for a 14-year-old to be in that system? No. Young children belong at home, and if they need extra support, and their parents do, then we need to be making more services available to these families in their community and funding those services. And the reality is those services exist. They're Aboriginal run and they're effective. And that's not just me saying that. All the statistics bear that out. What we need is a commitment from governments to fund these services like they would any other service. 4 Aboriginal people have died in New South Wales in 2 weeks. This is at the same time as these horrible floods we're living through, and less people have died in the floods. So the police are a greater threat to Aboriginal people than an enormous 1 in 100-year natural disaster. So we can't have picking around the edges, and I don't expect anything from the report. I want leadership to do what leadership is supposed to,